Assalamu alaikum, beautiful. Welcome to Spiritual Awakening, Enlighten Your Soul Podcast. I am your host, Nazish. I found my inner light through self-healing. I learned that every Muslim woman who is the light of her life have gone through different trials to get where she is today. So subscribe as we uncover hidden stories and learn from life experiences. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Spiritual Awakening Podcast. Today, I am so excited as I have with me Sister Sumiya. She is one of our coaches in TTC, and I have known her for, I think, a year now, or more than a year, probably. And she's a full-time therapist. That's right.
Correct. Yeah, I think longer than a year.
Yeah, longer
Um,
than a year.
while
Definitely.
you while you were a part of
THS.
TTS.
Yes. TTS. Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm
Alhamdulillah.
full-time therapist. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Jazakallah Khairan. It means a lot to me to have you, and I was so excited to have you. So, Jazakallah, I really appreciate your time and for being here on the podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here. I can't believe I'm on the other side of this, and I'm so proud of you. So yeah, I'm genuinely excited to be a part of your podcast. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. All right. So, first thing first that I want to know from the podcast is who is Sumiya? So, how would you describe yourself?
I think this is a tricky question because it varies. Uh, and sometimes I think I change with seasons, so drastically sometimes. But I think sometimes Samia is an extrovert um, who likes socializing with friends and going on courses and retreats, people and experiencing new things. And then sometimes I'm an introvert. I think I'm mainly naturally an introvert. um, and I like my own space, and I like the comfort of my home. I like sitting in a coffee shop with a book alone. I need time to recover and recuperate from the demands of day-to-day life. Um, but I think a big part of who I am is the work that I do. And naturally, I've always been a giver. I've always been a listener, and that is one of the reasons why I went into the field that I did, therapy. I wanted to help other people. I wanted to put my natural skills to use in a good way, in a beneficial way. So, alhamdulillah, although that can be very challenging, uh, I think I'm a mixture of a number of different things. Um, yeah, so it varies. It varies day to day.
I love how you put that because it also got me to thinking that am I an introvert or an extrovert? Because all my life I was feeling like I was an extrovert, but now I feel like I have those days when I want to be an introvert. So that's true. We have seen,
Yeah.
yeah.
And now we're heading into September, autumn. I'm already preparing to be an introvert.
Yes. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, but that was going to be my next question. Why therapy? So what led you to being a therapist, or what gave you the idea that that is my purpose and that is what I'm going to do?
So it really started quite young, actually, without really realizing. So I've always been a listener. And when I'm the youngest of six siblings.
Oh,
So it's
no way.
a big family. And as you can imagine, there's quite an age gap. Um, but there were always like serious life problems and things that my siblings were experiencing or the family was experiencing. And somehow I fell into this role of being the listener. And then when I was at school as well in the friendship group, maybe because I was naturally quite an introvert, so I was quiet in general. I was quite reserved. But in school, in friendship groups and social circles, I fell into that role again, of being the listener. And I spent most of my young years like that. And then I think when you get to a certain age in the UK, it's what's next, and you don't really get the time to think. So
Mm.
you do your main required studies, and then you have to pick what you want to do for university. And so at the time, I didn't really think, what do I want to do? There was so much pressure. And by pressure, I mean not just from the timeline, and I mean the pressure from family, when you have your Asian parents and expectations of what they want you to
Yeah.
do. Uh, and yeah, so it wasn't an easy decision, but I chose psychology and criminology. And I guess at the time it wasn't 100% clear, but I did know that I was interested in it, and I wanted a career in it. But no one told me how hard it would be and how hard getting a job in this field in the UK would be. So anyway, I went ahead with it despite all the Asians in my life saying psychology will get you nowhere. Don't do it. Pick pharmacy or medicine and all these other things.
Out of the
Um,
ground culture.
exactly. And yes, so that's where it all started for me. And I just thought, well, I do it anyway. I do it in my day-to-day life. And so I presumed that I would be good at doing that um, professionally as well.
Um, so it was like built up over a period of time, but you definitely went by the qualities that you had
Yeah.
and not by people and not by what people said.
Yes, definitely. And weirdly enough, in the UK, it's not a valued degree or a valued profession. So when you are choosing it, people don't really value the degree, and you will get put down. You should have done something better. It's not something that, especially Asians, value. And as you're probably aware yourself, mental health, there's so much stigma around it, and not many people understand it. So when you say psychology to people, there's a lot of confusion about what that entails. And maybe at the time, because I was so young, I was maybe 18 at the time, maybe I didn't even know what that really entailed.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I just wanted to do a job where it wasn't all about the money, and it was also about satisfaction and giving back, um, and utilizing my qualities, rather than focusing on, okay, what's going to make me the most money.
Yeah.
And so this was the path that I chose.
Mashallah. Mashallah. I really admire that about you because not everyone has that, I would say, the courage to not listen to all these voices around you and pick what you really want, what your heart really desires. So that is really good, mashallah. So, since we are on the Spiritual Awakening podcast, before the awakening happened, what was your routine like when you were in the low phase of your life or when you were experiencing different trials or tests by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How would you describe those trials? How did your routine look like? What kind of emotions you had in that phase?
So since we're already talking about younger years, I'll start from there. So I think spirituality has always been a big part of my family dynamic. I grew up um, with Sufism being a big part of our lives. Um, but it was always me witnessing it. So I knew it was there, I knew what it was, um, but I never valued it because when you're so young and you grow up in a Western culture, it's you overlook what your family's doing, you overlook what your parents are doing, and what they're asking of you, and you think you know best, and you go by what your friends are doing and what's happening in society and in culture. So I think most of that, outside, which is where I spent a lot of time, because you spend most of your time in school, um, that it was suppressed. I didn't talk about it, I didn't mention it, it wasn't a part of my identity. And then I would come home and it would be a big part of what was happening at home. And I think there was a lot of confusion for me. So anyway, years and years go by and it's the same thing. And I feel like spirituality wasn't tapped into for many years. And I was living a life that was kind of lost. So trials were happening, but you overlook it because you're drowning yourself with distractions. You're socializing, you're listening to music, you are engaging in things that are not necessarily right. But again, you're living a life, you're young, you're living a life of distraction. You're going to school, you're going to university, it's friends, it's fashion trends, it's music, it's all these things. And anyway, that's pretty much what my life looked like, until I started discovering myself. So I went through a big shift, maybe 7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So 7 years ago, I went through. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to tell anybody here how old I am. um, so yeah, around 7 years ago, my early 20s, I went through a big shift. So, I'd left university, and there were like two really, really important relationships in my life, very close. They were from my childhood. Um, and they were the only people that I had really, really like invested in. So it was day in, day out. You see each other, you share everything with each other. There's a lot of emotional and mental investment, and both those relationships fell apart.
Mm.
And because at that time, it was just them two people, and I invested more in my friendships than I did my family when I was younger. So I felt like I had nobody, when that happened, and it was just me. So at that point was when the shift happened, and I thought, what do I need right now, and what is the direction I can take? And I started spending time with myself for the first time in a very, very long time. And it wasn't easy. But that's where the spiritual shift happened for me. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I'm sure I can go on talking about this forever. That's just the early stages.
But what I want to know is that when you were sitting with yourself, what activities were you doing? Or was it just sitting with your thoughts?
So at the time, it was, I thought, what can I do? So I was still going out to places. I would go out with other people, but I would go alone, and I would take a book. And I started reading self-help books and finding spiritual books. I actually even traveled alone. So I went to Poland, out of all places. At the time, I was young. I didn't do any research. I didn't know that they were a very racist country. And I went as a hijabi, and I went to teach English there.
Oh, wow.
And it was just things like that. And then I got a job, in my field, and I started meeting people that were more aligned with the person that I wanted to be,
Mm.
and friendships that were nurturing me, and that I could be more myself with. And so at that point, I did start exploring the spiritual side. I did start exploring Sufism. I started attending courses and events, and it just started opening me up to a world that I already knew but ignored.
Mm.
And the funny thing is that, you know, when they say that you can go your whole life with ignorance and it's complete bliss. And that's what my younger years were. You know, it was bliss because I was in a state of ignorance
Mm.
because I was young and those things weren't of importance to me. But I think when you are spiritual and you are tapping into this other side of faith, the trials are more evident and they're harder. They are so much harder
Yeah.
to deal with because there's so much more self-awareness.
And I feel that
And
it's
so I
also because,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, no, you go.
I feel it's also because when we are on that path, we are trying so hard to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to stay in a line with Islamic values as well. Is that the trials only get tough because we know that the hardest battles goes to one of the warriors who are most loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So the trials just get tougher, but that only means that we are on the right path, right?
Absolutely. And I think that with the people don't realize that when you are learning and there is knowledge and education, the trials are different. You know, it's not you're not in the small league anymore. The trials are so much bigger, and it's not just affecting you emotionally. There's the mental trials, there's the physical trials, there's the impact on every area of your life. And now you're an adult, so you have to manage it better. And I think this is what we're always taught, like, you know, brush it under the rug, deal with it as soon as possible,
Mm.
and get over things. But that's not how healing works. You know, it comes in waves, and there will be periods where you're completely fine and you're doing great, and then all of a sudden everything comes back and it hits you again.
Yeah,
And I think that's the hardest bit about, you know, the spiritual aspect of things. You know, it there's the high that comes from it and it's beautiful. Um, but then you experience these lows,
that's,
and it's not an easy thing to deal with.
that's so true. And I'm so glad that you mentioned it because I think nobody has till now discussed on this podcast about how even in spirituality there are highs and lows and how normal it is to experience the lows. Because I feel like somewhere there is this misconception or norm that people who have achieved the high, they stay in the high. Like, that's what people think that, okay, you do create a benchmark when you hit the highs, but that doesn't mean that you're always going to stay there. There are going to be lows. And it's normal to have the lows. You don't have to sit and judge yourself or feel guilty or blame yourself that much for experiencing the lows. Yes, it's important to pick yourself up from there, but not make it more miserable for yourself.
Absolutely. I think the words that we say to our heads in our minds in that moment is what is important.
Yes.
Because when we beat ourselves up, when we say nasty things to ourselves, why am I like this? Other people are not like this. I need to get over this. Why am I depressed? I'm so distant from Allah. These are the things that actually stunt your growth and your progression. And it will not help you in that moment at all. And
Mm.
I find that people who are spiritual and practicing or students of knowledge, it's the lows are more common than the highs,
Mm.
you know, because it's not an easy path to take. And they say that people who are studying and learning the deen, shaitan attacks them 3 times as much as the person who isn't. And so we already know that when it comes to this journey and this path, the trials and tribulations are 3 times as much as those who are not. And that's just the nature of self-awareness and growth and spirituality and learning. And I think it's just preparation for that mentally, and learning how to be kind to ourselves when we're feeling like that. And instead of using it as an opportunity to say, why me? We can say, what can I learn from this instead?
Yes. And that is the biggest shift that we can have. And that is what I was coming to as well, that you mentioned about physical trials and you mentioned about why me, which leads me further to discussing chronic illness, because since I know you, I know that you also have a chronic illness and so do I. And what I wanted to get out of this podcast is also that you're a therapist and you're someone who has chronic illness for many years. How did you deal with it? Because we we both know that over a period of time it gets hard, and the first time when you get diagnosed or when you start realizing that your life is so different than others, there is this question that comes in our mind: why me? What wrong have I done? All those things that I feel like I have seen in some of my clients as well, in people I have interacted who have chronic illness, that at some point they had this question: why me? What wrong have I done? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing me? Which can be some of the limiting beliefs, which needs to be eliminated over a period of time. But how did you cope up with those feelings, with those thought process? And how did you step out of it?
So I think with me and my physical pains, I have been experiencing them for many, many years. So I have actually been experiencing physical pain since I was a child. And it has been a big part of my life, because I reached a certain point where it was normal to me and my family. So I actually used to tie hijabs around my legs, really, really, really tight, um, so that I wouldn't feel the pain. And I have been doing that since I was really young, since I was in high school, even maybe before that. And so I reached a certain point where it was normal for me, until I realized when outside people used to come to our house and they used to look at me weird and think, what are you doing? I realized that it's actually not normal for me to be experiencing that. So it's been a really big journey for me, because I haven't really ever thought, why me? But for me, my headspace was more like being hard on myself. Like, I should get over this because look at other people. And people can wake up at 6 a.m. and get on with the day and do this task by 9 a.m. and be so productive and what all these things. And people can go jogging and for hikes. And there was a lot of comparison for me. So it was more like, okay, I need to be that person. And I didn't take into account my physical restriction. And so I went years and years pushing myself. And I managed. I did the degrees and I work full time and I socialize after work and I do this and I do that. And I managed until I didn't manage anymore. And I reached a place of complete burnout, so burnt out. And I noticed that actually now things have further developed, and it's not just chronic pain in my legs, it's chronic pain everywhere. My shoulders have tension, my neck hurts, and I'm literally dragging myself through life. And so at that point, it was actually like more acceptance. And I actually can't, my body is different to these people that I'm comparing myself to, and that's fine. We're not all robots and we don't all have to be the same. And so that's the first change in my thought process that I had to have, which was complete acceptance. that we're all different, that my body is different and my capacity to do things is different. And I need a lie-in on a morning, and I'm a slow starter to the day. And I have to understand that there are certain things that will trigger my chronic pain. And so this is where the shift started happening for me. And I reduced working full time to part time. And I started making adjustments in my day where I could sleep in, and I didn't make myself feel guilty for it, because I have chronic fatigue and I need that. I need more hours to sleep than maybe the average person. So I think for me, the mindset shift went from I need to be like them to I'm not like them, and that's fine.
Wow. I love that so much, because though the process is so hard, but the minute you accept it, it becomes so easy as well. And I feel like I was in that process stuck for quite a long period till I hit burnout too. And I realized that I can't do it anymore. And that was a very hard realization and a very low phase in my life. But ever since then, it only got better because I started accepting that, okay, these are the things that I used to do that I can't do anymore, and it's okay. These are the energy levels that I used to have that I won't have anymore, and it's okay. And that acceptance made it so much easy, because it constantly feels like you are fighting with yourself. And it definitely doesn't take you in a better headspace. So accepting it, though it's hard, it's probably going to take a while for somebody to reach that point, but it's also one of the most beautiful place to be, because there is a lot of things that you let go. Did accepting it made it easier for you in terms of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or did this never affected your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
I think it made it easier because now, when the guilt of not doing what I was supposed to do, like others do, when I say in comparison to other people, I mean practicing faith as well. And with people who have chronic pain and chronic fatigue, praying isn't easy. It does not come easy. And forcing yourself to get up and make wudu might be one of the hardest things that you ever push yourself to do. And especially in times like Ramadan, when routine changes and you're spending more time worshipping than sleeping, but you really, really need the sleep. And I think that the acceptance helped that, because there was no longer guilt and there was no longer shame. And when we let go of things like shame and guilt, we can tap into actually being productive, because we're not exhausting ourselves with emotions like shame and guilt. Like, I've let that go now. It's okay. So how can I move forward? How can I utilize my time so that I can be productive in Ramadan? And so once that acceptance came, I realized that I don't want to be working in Ramadan, because it's too much for me to do it all. And so my relationship with Allah changed because the priorities changed. And it's because I knew myself better and I knew my body better. And I knew that I couldn't do both. I couldn't be working full time and really make the most of the month. And so I don't work much in Ramadan anymore at all. And I will stay awake most of the night and pray and worship. And I will sleep in until Zohar without guilt, because I know that I need that, and I know that the night is important in Ramadan, and practicing and praying and making dua at night is important. And I know that there's no harm done if I sleep in until Zohar, just so long as I'm making up for it. And that's what I started to do, and that has been my routine in Ramadan for the last few years. And even at home, everybody knows that I will not be working much. I am the person who stays awake until suhoor, and I am the person who will make suhoor while everybody else sleeps until that time, because their routines are different, and that's fine. But that now works for me, and I've learned that works for me. So I think the moment we recognize, we accept, and then we recognize our bodies and what's required, your relationship with Allah can drastically change because you can make those adjustments required.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Because I myself have seen every Ramadan the changes that I have made to my routine. And my family slowly and gradually adapting to that routine now. That okay, it's gonna be like that for her. But that's true. The minute you accept it, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala improves a lot because you have, like you said, I'm just going to repeat that you're no more exhausting yourself in those emotions, in experiencing those emotions of guilt and feeling ashamed of not being able to do more than even sometimes just the obligatory prayers. So that is really important. The shift, the mindset shift, and the spirituality aspect that comes with it. Alhamdulillah. Now, now that we've experienced how it was tapping from your lows to your highs and kind of accepting and moving ahead and embracing who you are, what practice did you do to, to stay in that higher self? What is that one advice or tool or technique that you would want to share with the listeners that would help them to not go back into their low phase? It could be chronic illness, it could be, life when you were trying to run away and escape from things and not face them. So what advice would you give to that person?
I would say know yourself, know what makes you happy, know what pulls you out of that place. And once you know that, once you're aware and you start noticing signs that you're falling into that again, start to do those things. Don't withdraw. And I think routine and structure to your day-to-day life is really important. Once we lose that, you're going to go into a deeper place of darkness and depression. And so I would say maintain that. Know what makes you happy. We all have something. And I know that this is not always easy for everybody, especially if you're in a place where you can't see any light and you can't find anything that makes you happy anymore. But it's the smallest things, it's knowing the smallest things. Like I know if I get up and um, open the blinds and have a shower, that will change my mood. So it's knowing what will make a difference and trying to maintain that. But I think having a good social circle is important.
Yeah.
So having friends who can uplift you and who can support you, who accepts you for who you are, but also push you to come out of that. That is very important. I have, alhamdulillah, a good circle of friends who do that. And although most of them work in mental health, so they know that they're qualified, but it helps to have people like that, people in your corner.
Mhm.
But also know what you can do for yourself when you're alone. Is it reading a book? Is it having a coffee? Is it going for a walk? And it's just small things that you used to do but have stopped doing and try to implement that slowly in your life again. And then when it comes to routine, I also mean routine of spirituality. So for me, every Thursday I attend a dhikr gathering, and sometimes it that day that I go on Thursdays, it's also my working in the office day. So sometimes I really, really, really want to talk myself out of it because I'm tired, I'm exhausted. But now I take my nephew and he holds me accountable because he really wants to go and he has that routine and he really enjoys it. And so now I don't want to let him down. And he is the reason why I will go every Thursday, but it's good for me. And there's a sense of structure, there's a routine, we're worshipping Allah, there's maintaining that spirituality, and I can cry there. You
Yes.
know, if I'm feeling low, and it's like therapy. So I think it's just finding what works for you and taking those small steps. And it's always small.
Yeah.
Don't ever think it's go home. It's small but consistent. Uh, and I know that we're in a culture where everyone thinks, oh, it needs to be big, and we need to always be doing big. No, it's a lie. If we fall into that, you're going to go into a deeper place of depression. Don't believe it. It's always small, and it's never what works for other people. It's always what works for you. If Instagram is promoting bubble baths and candles, that's great, but it might not work for you, you know. So don't force yourself to do these acts of self-care that don't work for you. Self-care is individual, and find that.
Oh, amazingly answered. It got me to thinking, what are the things that would make it very easy for me and which are very simple to implement as well? Because I feel like I need to create a new minimalistic self-care routine that doesn't demand much. And that's true. In the brown culture, it's like you have to do the big things. And it is, I think, a biggest love.
You know what? Sometimes, what nobody wants to admit to, but sometimes self-care is washing the dishes or doing the laundry
Yeah.
and hoovering. You know, sometimes self-care is just that. And so when people tell you self-care is booking your next holiday or self-care is getting on a fancy outfit and going to a fancy, it's not true. And I know this because I've done this. I go on holidays and I go out, and you will still come back to your life, and it's just a form of escape and avoidance. So the big things are just that, you know, make a routine for yourself in your bubble that is consistent to your day to day, that includes your people, you know, family, friends, in a circle. Create a consistent and realistic routine based on that. And you'll find that there's huge changes that will be made, not only to your routine, but to your mental health and your physical health.
Yeah. I don't know about others, but I am getting so much out of this podcast. So my last question is that one thing that when you were in your lows that you hold on tight, it could be one or it could be several things, but one thing that you want to mention that helped you spiritually to hang in there, like to hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what one activity or one something that you did that helped you to just hang in there in your lows?
So externally, so something big for me was going to courses, attending places of knowledge. And the reason that helped me was because I felt like the more I was in those environments, the more it was pushing me to be the person that I wanted to be rather than the person that I feel that I am. So it was helping me strive towards a goal of the type of Muslim I'd like to be. So that helped, but that's not always feasible. You know, courses are expensive and can't always attend them. And so the small acts, I think, for me, that kind of keeps me alive. And I think that spirituality looks different to other people, but for me, it's family. You know, we have to remember that worship doesn't always come in the form of praying. Worship is family and neighbors and being good and doing good. And so when I feel horrible, and I don't say this lightly, It's my nieces and nephews. And I hope they don't watch this because they'll get really big-headed and torture me forever. But I have 13 nieces and nephews.
Oh, wow.
And I'm the youngest. And for some of them, I was young when I was growing up. And for some of them, I've been this age and I feel more like a parent figure. And so they're around me all the time. And for me, it has always been, yeah, I feel horrible and I will cry myself to sleep most nights. But then I want to get better. I want to show them that this is not something that needs to be consistent and there are ways out. And I want to be better and do better for them. And so I would say hold on to the people that make you feel like that, whether that's your parents, your grandparents, a friend, a spouse, a sibling, a niece or a nephew, a loved one, and use that as a tool of worship because our family, our relationships are a form of worship. And I want to teach them and I want to see them. They see me sad and they're very supportive, but then I also want them to see me overcome that. So for me, really, that's my motivation. That might not be relatable for everybody listening to this, but I would say it's just finding things closer to home, that keep you ticking. It could be your cat.
Yeah.
I don't know. For everybody, it's absolutely different. I know that I work with a lot of non-Muslims, and for them, it's their dog, and because of their dog, they get up and they have to get changed and they have to go take the dog for a walk. And so they make that a purpose. And although that's not like us, but we have to find our purpose. And there is always a purpose, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So I would say check in with yourself, your intentions, and reigniting that purpose within.
Wow. Sister Sumiya, you have shared so many good gems with us today. And I think it is relatable because you know, we all have certain people in our life who held us accountable, or we want to be a role model to them. So I think a lot of people are going to relate to this. A lot of listeners are going to relate to this and make that a motivation. For me, I think having my daughter was like a U-turn. Like I was like, okay, this is it. No more being in that space. I need to show her up the good side, the better side, and be the role model for her. So that was quite of an awakening. And that gives me that extra push on my bad days. So I'll definitely agree to you that that's a very big motivation, having those people around you whom you want to show that, life does get easier and we just have to keep trying. So I'm very happy that you mentioned that. And amazing insights. Jazakallah khairan, really, for doing this and for being here on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did too.
I did. Thank you so much. It's been a learning opportunity for me as well because it's reminded me of a few things. And just because I have found my ways of coming out of that place doesn't mean I don't have them often. And so it's a reminder for me as well that I also need to create that list and maintain certain things and just keep going. And we all need that reminder sometimes. So thank you as well for asking me to come. It's allowed me to reflect on my journey as well and things that will help me moving forward.
No, definitely. And I get this a lot on my podcast, but I feel it's too that when people talk, it's not just a reminder for us, but it also is a reminder for themselves as well. And I get that very often, and I feel like I get so many beautiful reminders through this podcast interviews, mashallah. All of you beautiful guests who come here and share and be vulnerable and share your stories just to give, insights and help the ones who are listening to feel better and to feel motivated and inspired. Jazakallah khairan for really doing this, because I know how much it takes to come and share your story. So I really appreciate having you here, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts lots of barakah in your life and in your work. And I'm so glad that I had you as one of the coach in the program. And I'm so glad I came across you.
No, Jazakallah khair as well for holding the space for me. It felt like a therapy session. It was nice to finally be a part of your podcast. And I am super proud.
Alhamdulillah.
And I do pray that Allah allows us to overcome these obstacles and these trials that we face with ease, and that we are always able to find a light at the end of the tunnel, inshallah. I know that's not always easy for everybody, but I do hope that everybody here, everybody watching, is able to find at least one thing that keeps them going,
inshallah. Allahumma ameen ya Rabb. All right, sister, I'll let you go. Assalamu alaikum.